Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 5 of Project Fairy by Jacqueline Wilson, continuing from chapter 10. Are you nuts? Mickey asked at the end of school. Probably, I said. They'll all laugh at you if you start sprouting about fairies, said Mickey. Then they'll be stupid. Fairies take offence very easily. They might find their laces get tied together so that they fall over, I said. You're talking like you actually believe in them, said Mickey. You are nuts. Who cares, I said. I did care. I knew I was going to be a laughingstock. But I felt I owed it to Bindweed. I bent down, pretending to pull up my sock, but I gave her a very fond little pat. I hoped she was pleased, and I knew Mum would be too. She seemed happy already when she collected us from the after-school club. Hello, chickies, she said, beaming at us. You seem in ever such a good mood, Mum. I take it Mr. Henry isn't going to get rid of you, I said. The exact opposite, said Mum. I went into his office all of a tremble, and he was actually lovely. He said he was impressed with the way I worked and that I was very good with the customers. Mr. Henry said that, but I thought he was always so fierce and horrid. Well, not exactly fierce, or horrid, but he's always been so serious, keeping watch on all us girls, said Mum. It was weird, the way the supermarket ladies all called themselves girls, even the ones old enough to be grannies. I thought he was weighing me up, about to give me the chop. Shows what a muddle I can get into. He's actually going to up my wages. Well, it's lovely that he's so pleased with you, Mum, isn't it, Robin? Clever, Mum. So, are we having a special treat supper? Robin asked hopefully, eyeing up Mum's shopping bag. Is that ice cream? It certainly is ice cream, and we're going to have chicken too, with new potatoes and salad, said Mum. I used my shop discount card to buy lots of lovely things today. Yay, said Robin. He chanted all the way home, chicken for supper, yum, 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 and ice cream too. I hope it's strawberry, but I wish it was chips instead of new potatoes, and never mind the boring old salad. The second he got home, he charged off to get Fido out of his cardboard box kennel, promising to share this feast with him. I wondered what Bindweed would think of a mini version of this meal. I wasn't sure about the chicken. She hadn't been keen on the fish finger. I thought fairies were probably vegetarian, but maybe she'd like a little chopped-up salad. And everyone liked ice cream, didn't they? I went into my bedroom, sat down, and fished Bindweed out of my sock. She looked a little rumpled, her cap askew and her curls all over the place. At last, I thought you were keeping me tucked down in your sock forever, she said, stretching. What a long, long, long day. I'm so glad fairies don't have to go to school. And why on earth does your mother come to collect you, a great girl like you? She'd worry about Robin and me crossing the road. You know what mums are like, I said, laying Bindweed gently on my pillow. She stretched into a starfish shape and then wriggled over onto her tummy and flapped her wings. They were bent out of shape and took a while to unfold properly. I don't know what human mothers are like, said Bindweed. When our mothers give birth, there's a huge celebration for each little newborn fairy bud. Baby fairies toddle about for a few months, generally creating havoc, but as soon as they can fly, they look after themselves. I was particularly advanced, entirely independent when I was 3 months old, and no bigger than a ladybird. That is an interesting fairy fact. I would start taking notes for your project right this minute. Oh, I hoped you'd help me, I said. I reached for my school bag and opened it. Oh dear, it's still a bit yucky inside. I don't suppose you can magic it clean again. Fairies aren't washerwomen, said Bindweed testily. We don't stoop to that kind of magic. It's a total waste of our powers. In any case, I doubt I have much left. My enforced hibernation has weakened me considerably. I am fading away. She held out her little hands to the light. I was alarmed to see that they were semi-transparent. She sighed dramatically and shook them. I wouldn't be at all surprised if my poor hands fell right off my arms. Your hands are still strong enough to tie shoelaces, I said quickly. Oh, Bindweed, it was so naughty of you to play that trick on her, though I'm so glad you did it. Poor Kaffy looked so funny. Poor Kaffy? Have a little spirit, please. She's a total monster. You can sit meekly and let her insult you, but I'm not having anyone get the better of my girl, said Bindweed. I'm your girl, I whispered. I feel honoured. And so you should be, said Bindweed. Of course, the arrangement is only temporary. Tomorrow you will find me a new home, seeing as my poor dear Wentworth is a bleak ruin without so much as a blade of grass. What's happened to ivy and nettle and dandelion? Are we all done for now? Bindweed put her hand to her forehead dramatically. Am I the last fairy on earth? And there are only tin-tack replicas left, like the abominations in your home. Hey, that's ever so rude. Mum's ornaments are very pretty, I said. Much prettier than you, I thought, but I didn't want to hurt her feelings. Bindweed sniffed dismissively. I suppose she doesn't know any better, she said. That's still insulting my mum. If your little booty things had laces, then I might decide to tangle them up, and when you go to sleep, I said. Then you'd be the one falling flat on your face. I waited a little anxiously, hoping that she would realise I was only joking. She raised her tiny eyebrows and sucked in her weeny lips. Very funny, she said, with gritted teeth. Do not mock me when I am in the depths of despair. Look, I promise I'll do my very best to find you a new home, I said. It's Saturday tomorrow. I won't have to bunk off school. I'm sure we'll be able to find somewhere that suits you. A place with lots of flowers. I know. What about an actual flower shop? There was one in the shopping centre. Mum often stood peering in the window at the elaborate floral displays. She liked to watch the customers too. She sighed in sympathy if someone tear-stained trudged in to discuss a funeral wreath. She smiled when young women went in with their mothers to choose a bridal bouquet. She cooed with delight when a man darted in the shop and came out carrying a big bunch of roses for his sweetheart. Valentine's Day was her favourite time of the year, though she never received a single red rose herself. A flower shop? Bindweed said doubtfully. I don't think that would be at all suitable. Much too confined and with very little scope. I need somewhere outdoors, somewhere green where I can let myself run wild. A big garden, I suggested. There weren't any proper gardens in our street, and even the parks were just grass and play equipment. No real wild bits. I didn't know anyone with a real garden either, and then I suddenly remembered Mrs. Horsley and her beautiful roses. My teacher must have a lovely garden, I said excitedly. I could find out where she lives. I know she grows roses there. You said you liked roses. I like to choke them, said Bindweed. Is your teacher a keen gardener? I think she must be, I said, wondering how you could choke a plant. She keeps her classroom neat and tidy, said Bindweed. I expect she's a keen weeder. I doubt any bindweed would flourish there. Gardeners are my deadly enemy. Would you like to be yanked up by your roots and thrown on a dung heap? I speak from personal experience, she said, clutching her chest at the memory. Think again. I'm trying to, I said, but it was very difficult. Look, have a peer in my fairy book to see if you can spot anywhere that seems like your ideal home, and I'll wash out my school bag while Mum's busy in the kitchen. I set the book on my bed and opened it for her, hoping she'd be able to manage turning the pages herself, even though they were big as sheets for her. She didn't say thank you. Here was one more fact for my special project. Fairies weren't very polite. I locked myself in the bathroom, ran some water into the sink, and started taking out the slimy contents of my school bag. I wiped my pen and pencils with loo paper, and then used soapy water and a flannel, and dried them with a towel. I was scrupulous about using my own flannel and towel because it only seemed fair. 2 of my school textbooks had laminated covers and were quite easy to clean, but my brand new project book was a nightmare. I managed to clean it and it didn't smell anymore, but the pages were all crinkled and soggy. I'd have to tell Mrs. Horsley it fell in the bath. I was worried about the many lies I was telling, but if I told her truthfully that a fairy had been sick in my school bag, she'd think I'd gone bananas. Then I had a good scrub in the bag, using a lot of bubble bath to make it smell really fresh, and it came up as good as new. Well, almost. I wiped it dry carefully and came out of the bathroom with a light heart. And then I bumped into Mum. I was just about to knock. Supper's ready, sweetheart. Are you all right? You've been in ages in there, she said. She peered at my school bag. You weren't doing your homework on the toilet, were you? She asked. I needed to sort something out, I said. You're a funny little sausage, Mum said. She put her arm around me and steered me into the kitchen. Bindweed would simply have to wait. She had lots of pictures to look at after all. Supper was lovely. Cold chicken, tomatoes, cucumber, lettuce, sweet corn, and little new potatoes dabbed with butter. It seems very extravagant, even counting in my new pay rise, but I thought it was a day of celebration, said Mum. And there's ice cream for pudding? Robin checked. Yes, there is, darling. Strawberry, said Mum. Ron smacked his lips appreciatively. I sidled to the kitchen drawer and pretended I was searching for the box of tissues. I was actually looking for our matchbox. Luckily, there weren't too many matches in it. I emptied them out as silently as I could and slipped the box into my hand. I didn't want to gum up my pocket again, and salad and ice cream all slopped together wouldn't be appetising, no matter how delicious individually. Mum and Robin both talked non-stop throughout the meal, Mum repeating Mr. Henry's compliments, and Robin yakking away about playing mummies and daddies with his little girlfriends in the playground. I was the daddy, of course, and I promised my wife and daughters I would never ever leave them, Robin said. Mum choked on her chicken and looked as if she might cry. Of course you wouldn't, darling, she said. Luckily, she was so pleased about Mr. Henry giving her a wage rise that she didn't get too upset. She started talking about his plans for a bigger salad bar in the supermarket with a much wider variety of choices. Mr. Henry says more people are into healthy eating now, and we're going to introduce more vegan options too. He's got such good ideas, said Mum. I nodded and smiled at her, while stealthily transferring a sliver of tomato and cucumber, a couple of golden corn seeds, and the tiniest leaf off the heart of the lettuce to the matchbox. I didn't add a piece of potato because Bindweed didn't seem to care for hot food, and then I concentrated on my own meal and ate it all up. I risked transferring a big spoonful of ice cream to the matchbox too, praying it wouldn't thaw too rapidly. That was the yummiest meal ever, said Robin. Even the salad was nice, apart from the green bits. I don't really see the point of cucumber and lettuce. Bindweed liked her cucumber and lettuce most of all. She spurned the tomato and sweet corn. I don't recognise these fruits, she said, but generally bright colours are to be avoided. Many are deadly poisonous. I haven't survived being squashed in a book for many, many years, simply to succumb to death by bellyache. She liked the ice cream most of all, though she had to scoop it up with her fingers. Wild strawberries are my favourite snack. How clever to mix them up with this cold cream. I feel so much better, she said, smacking her little lips. Her wings fluttered joyfully, the green veins darker, forming a beautiful pattern. Her long hair grew curlier and shone with new emerald vigour. I'm so glad we found something you really like, I said. I'll ask Mum if you can have lots of salad. She'll be pleased because it's very good for us. I don't think she'll let us have ice cream every day, but I can always ask. But I won't be here, will I? You're going to find me a new home, said Bindweed. I know, I promised. It's the topmost problem in my mind, I said. Still, while we're still looking for the right place, could you possibly help me with my fairy project? You promised. Very well. We must get to work, said Bindweed. She bounced across my bed to the open book of fairy paintings. Most of these paintings are totally erroneous. What does that mean? I asked. Bindweed sighed heavily. You're so ignorant, Miss Mabe. It means they are inaccurate, ludicrously so, figments of someone's warped imagination. These painters have never seen a fairy in their lives. So I can't write about them for my fairy project, I said, disappointed. Each painting has a lot of writing beside it, so I thought I could copy a lot of it to make my project look impressive. I wanted to try to copy some of the paintings too. Write about them if you must, but why waste your time copying the artwork when they are so gross, said Bindweed, poking one of the paintings of a flying fairy with a disdainful finger. She's not gross, I argued. I read the title of the painting, Iris. You should like her. She's a flower fairy like you. She's called Iris. No decent fairy would fly around stark naked, said Bindweed primly. She's very vulgar. Naked figures aren't rude if they're in a painting, I said, though I knew Mum thought them very rude, even so, and they made Robin shriek with laughter. I happen to have made the acquaintance of many wild iris fairies in my time, and though they were flighty girls, they were always decently dressed in purple or yellow frocks, with caps and slippers to match, and their wings were rather splendid, powerful and strongly veined, not these pathetic glittery protuberances, said Bindweed. I wasn't sure what that meant either, but as she'd got so tetchy before, I didn't like to ask. How could she possibly fly with these stunted little wings, she declared, and in that bizarre position too, arms folded, legs together, as if that would ever work. I think that artist simply wanted to paint somebody naked. What about these fairies then, I said, turning the pages. They've all got big wings and long dresses. I think they're quite pretty. Bindweed sniffed. Then you have no taste, she said. And you have no manners, I retorted. To my surprise, she chuckled. That's the spirit, she said. You must learn to stand up for yourself. I'm amazed you let those tedious girls in your class make fun of you. They call me names, I said. Then call them names too, worse ones, and play tricks on them. That is the fairy way, said Bindweed. I think the fairy way might get me into trouble, I said. Actually, I'm already in trouble. Kathy's mum thinks I knocked her over on purpose and hurt her leg. Serves her right, said Bindweed. Yes, but suppose she'd really been hurt, I said. You're so kind, said Bindweed. She said it as if it was an insult. You wouldn't last 5 minutes if you were me. We Bindweeds are tough and fierce and determined. We cling and choke to survive. That's why we've lasted through the centuries. We may appear fragile, but we have spirits of steel. Come what may. I dare say you wouldn't have survived being squashed in a book for years. Don't suppose I would, I agreed humbly. That is what I wish you to emphasise in your project, said Bindweed. The superior character of the convolvulus family. It's strongly disputed, of course, but the Bindweeds and their lesser cousins are actually the kings and queens of all the flower fairies, indeed the entire fairy world. Take your notebook and write that down for your project. I discovered that the pages of my notebook were too puckered and wrinkly to write on, so I had to use my big drawing book instead. It had large blank pages, and I've got small squashed-up handwriting, but I'd filled one whole page by the time Mum called me into the living room. What have you been up to, Mabe? It's nearly bedtime, she said, patting the sofa so I could come and snuggle up beside her. Robin was on her lap, sucking his thumb while she read him a story. I've been working hard on my school project, I said, for once telling the absolute truth. What's the subject then, Mum asked. I took a deep breath. Fairies, I said. Oh, Mabe, seriously? Oh, darling, that's fantastic, said Mum, her eyes shining. All the eyes of the china and pewter and plaster fairies seemed to gleam too, and the fairy lights flashed. Perhaps I could help you, Mum added eagerly. I've learned quite a bit about fairy folk. Well, thanks, Mum, but I'd really like to do all the research myself, I said. I knew Mum's take on fairies was never going to chime with bindweeds. Don't worry, I understand. We don't want Mrs. Horsley to think you've been cheating, said Mum. Hey, I wonder if you'll be allowed to present your project wearing your fairy dress. Yes, I wonder, I said carefully. Anyway, cuddle up. I'm reading Peter Pan to Robin and Mum. So, come on. Peter tells you to clap hands if you believe in fairies to save Tinker Bell's life, said Robin. I clapped. Didn't I, Mum? He paused, even though I'm not sure I really do believe in fairies now I'm older. Robin, said Mum, 5's not old. I believe in fairies and I'm not old. Some of my friends at school say fairies are silly, said Robin. I bet they don't say that about the Tooth Fairy, I teased. Well, you don't believe in fairies, do you? Robin persisted. I do, actually, I said. That's a fib, said Robin. No, it's not. It's the absolute truth, I declared. Oh, Mabe, said Mum. She looked incredibly touched. You don't have to believe just to please me. I know a lot of people think I'm completely bonkers. I told one of the girls at work that I'd bought you a fairy frock for your birthday, and she pulled this face and said, I thought your daughter was in the juniors. Isn't she a bit old for that lark? Well, I'm not, I said. I love my fairy dress. It's my best birthday present ever. That wasn't the absolute truth. In fact, it was a downright lie. But it couldn't be helped. Mum, I know Peter Pan and Tinker Bell lived in Neverland, which is a made-up place. But where did he live before that? In Kensington Gardens, said Mum, and that's definitely real because I used to go past it on the bus every day when I worked in this big hotel. And are Kensington Gardens actual gardens, I asked? All garden and no big blocks of flats? Yes, huge gardens, and I think they've got a statue of Peter Pan there. I've seen a picture of it on one of my fairy mags. Could we go and see the statue then, and the rest of the gardens? Do you think they're the sort of gardens where fairies might like to live now? Well, I would, said Mum. Could we maybe go there tomorrow, on the bus, to have a look? Then I could write about it for my project, I asked. Well, it's a really long bus ride away from here, but I suppose so. All right then, darling. We'll have a lovely Saturday out, said Mum. I gave her a hug. Maybe I'd found a new home for bindweed, just as I'd promised. Chapter 11. Have you heard of a place called Kensington Gardens? I asked Bindweed as I tucked her up in my slipper under the bed. I don't think so, she said. Well, we're going there tomorrow. It's Saturday, so I don't have to wear school uniform. I'm going to wear a dress with a proper pocket. I'll pop you in it and it'll be much more comfortable than my school bag or my sock. Mum says these gardens are huge and fairies used to live there, so I think I've found you a new home just like I promised, I said proudly. Really? Said Bindweed, bouncing out of my slipper and turning a cartwheel. She looked so sweet and tiny and happy that I felt a sudden pang. She'd become part of my life now, even though she could be very demanding at times. I realised I was going to miss her tremendously. Unless you decide that you wanted to stay here, I said casually. Bindweed blinked at me. But there's no greenery, she said. Well, they sell plants down the market. Maybe I could get Mum to buy some. I didn't know much about them. The only thing I'd ever grown was some mustard and cress on an old flannel, but I didn't think bindweed would count that as greenery. We had a strange plant called a spider plant on the windowsill in Mrs. Horsley's class. It was quite interesting because it grew little baby spider plants at the end of its fronds. How about a spider plant, I suggested. A spider plant, said Bindweed doubtfully. Not real spiders, I hope. How big are they? Could you possibly fill your small dwelling with them? I think we'd have to stick to one spider plant, I said, but they're quite big compared to you. I gestured with my hands. Bindweed rolled her green eyes. I could choke that in half an hour, she said. You meant to feed and water plants and give them lots of daylight, I said. Why do you always want to choke them? It's my nature, said Bindweed. I feed and drink from them and steal their daylight. We bindweeds are world experts. They employed a whole team of doltish gardeners at Wentworth who battled hard to beat us, but we rioted all over the grounds and sprang out triumphantly from every hedge. We were the bane of their lives. I sighed. Even with Mum's rise in salary, I knew we could never provide enough plants for Bindweed to riot in. I couldn't help thrilling at the idea of turning our flat into a garden centre so that bindweeds could trail over the bed, climb the curtains, and crisscross the ceiling, but I knew it wouldn't be allowed. Even though Mum was completely better, we still had visits from a social worker every now and then to check up on us. We used to have a kind, cheerful lady called Arrett who gave us cuddles, even Mum, but now we had Mrs. Wright, who was old and bossy and a real know-it-all. She was always fussing about health and safety and worried about Mum's fairy lights and the state of Fido, whose coat might once have been cream-coloured, but was now a strange shade of sludge. Goodness knows what she'd say if she found our flat taken over by a jungle. I suppose it wouldn't work, I said sadly. Oh well, Let's hope Kensington Gardens is a lovely place, though I will miss you tremendously if you stay there, Bindweed. She looked up at me curiously. I don't think I've ever been missed before, she said. People generally detest me, and my kin. I am called the gardener's curse, a creeping killer. Folk like to take fistfuls of my fronds, pull them up by the roots, and then burn them in bonfires. I've lost count of the massacres I've witnessed. I reached down and scooped her up. Why don't you come and lie on my pillow for a bit? I'm sure it's a bit stuffy in my slipper. Mum's just washed the sheets, so they smell lovely, like lilac. Really, said Bindweed. She wriggled out of my grasp and buried her head in the pillow. That's not like any lilac I've ever smelled, but I suppose it's reasonably pleasant, she admitted. She seemed to be trying to be reasonably pleasant herself. Neither of us were at all sleepy, so we lay on our backs and chatted. Bindweed tested me on my fairy knowledge. She gave me a poke if I got anything wrong, but a little pat with her tiny hand if I answered correctly. I couldn't help feeling her fairy history was a little biased, because the Bindweeds and their lesser cousins were always the most brave, handsome, courageous, successful fairies, superior in every way. And can fairies really grant wishes? I asked her. It depends, said Bindweed, if they feel so inclined. I dare say fairies can do anything. Not common little buds like the daisies or the buttercups, or even those snooty wild orchids who think themselves so precious. But Bindweeds quite definitely have the power. So, could you grant me a wish? I asked. Bindweed looked at me, considering. I'm still weak from my long hibernation, but I think I could summon up the energy to grant something simple. Would you like me to play another trick on that Kathy person? I could curdle her milk in a trice. Curdle her milk? I repeated, baffled. When she's milked the family cow and put the bowl in the dairy, said Bindweed. Kathy hasn't got a cow, I said. You don't keep farm animals at home nowadays. Some people keep chickens, but only if they've got gardens. The housing association won't let us have any pets at all in our flat. Well, the lady upstairs has a budgie, but she keeps it in a cage. Doesn't your little brother have the Fido creature? Bindweed asked. Yes, but he's not a real dog, I said. I don't suppose you could turn him into a real dog, could you, Bindweed? I asked, sidetracked. Maybe it was time I started breaking a few rules too. I hardly think that would be wise. Fido would take one look at me and gobble me up in a trice, said Bindweed. Focus on Kathy. I dare say I could conjure up a few warts on her nose. I couldn't help a wicked giggle at the thought of Kathy's pretty little snub nose with warts all over it, but it seemed such a mean thing to do, and suppose they were permanent. I really don't want you to do that, Bindweed, I said. My virtue didn't impress her one bit. You are such a sap, she said. Not fun at all. A pathetic little mouse of a girl. Ah. What do you mean, ah? I asked warily. How about I inflict a plague of mice on her dwelling place? Or perhaps I could go to the whole hog and make them rats, said Bindweed. Stop it, that's awful, I said, although I had a sudden image of Kathy and her horrid mum rushing around screaming their heads off, with mice running up and down their legs. Promise me you won't ever do anything like that, I added, a little reluctantly. There's no need to fuss so, I was only teasing. I'm not at all keen on rodents myself. Some of my fellow fairies tame them and ride them when they need to give their wings a rest, but I've never cared for the idea. Those teeth could inflict a nasty bite, said Bindweed. Don't you ever grant lovely wishes? I asked. I've never felt the urge, said Bindweed. She stretched her small limbs and then wriggled a little nearer until she was curled up in the palm of my hand. But I suppose I could try. Tell me your heart's desire. Well, I want my dad to come back. Not really for me. I'm still angry at him for walking out on us. It's for Mum. It would make her really happy again. I said your heart. I don't want to strain myself granting wishes for all your family. I thought really hard. I suppose what I'd really like, I began. Yes, spit it out, said Bindweed. I'd like Billy to be friends with me again. Not just a little bit friendly behind Kathy's back, proper friends, like we were before, I said wistfully. Bindweed gave me a look. I'm not sure it's worth summoning up all my magical powers on such a paltry wish, she said. What does paltry mean? I asked. I wish you wouldn't use such difficult words all the time. Oh, that wasn't my wish. Just as well. I don't see why I should use baby talk when I'm a mature fairy of 180 or so, said Bindweed. Try a proper wish. Challenge me. I tried hard to think of something. I didn't want to mess up this one chance. Can I have a little think about my wish and ask you tomorrow? Very well, said Bindweed. She yawned and wriggled. It's been a long day. I'm rather tired now. I wonder if you could return me to your slipper. It's very comfortable up here, but I don't want to get all squashed all over again if you lie on me. Don't take offence, but you are rather a great lump of a girl. No, I'm not, and you mustn't call anyone a great lump. That's fat-shaming, I said indignantly. I can call anyone anything I like, said Bindweed. Fairies and their kin positively delight in name-calling. My goodness, you should have heard the boggarts who lived in a ditch at Wentworth. What's a boggart? They don't sound very nice, I said. Boggarts are crude, hairy creatures who live in a dark, slimy place and make mischief, though they're generally harmless. Bindweed yawned again. Bedtime. Please, couldn't you tell me more about fairy creatures, I asked. Do boggarts have hair all over, like monkeys? What exactly is a pixie? Is it the same as a fairy? And what about goblins? Oh, for goodness sake, haven't I told you enough about fairies? Do I really have to talk my way through the entire world of magical creatures, good and bad? Bindweed complained. Just a few. Oh, Bindweed, it's probably our last night together. Please talk to me just a little more, I begged. I'm tired, Bindweed whined. Just for 10 minutes. She sighed so deeply she made a little breeze. Very well. Though it would take 10,000 minutes to describe every species of the fairy kingdom, she said. Can I take notes for my fairy project, I asked, jumping out of bed and grabbing my drawing book. She dictated wearily while I scribbled, though her voice kept fading as she fell asleep. I stroked her gently each time, and she sighed and continued, doing her best. And then she started snoring. It was the funniest little sound, like a cat purring, and I didn't have the heart to wake her up yet again. I wanted her to stay on the pillow beside me, so I could look at her in the moonlight. I was sure I wouldn't roll on her and squash her. I lay down very carefully, trying not to disturb her, but she opened one green eye. Slipper, she murmured. So I scooped her up carefully, hung over the bed and inserted her into the slipper. I gave her long green curls a very gentle stroke and then settled down to sleep myself. I dreamed about pixies and goblins and boggarts, and when I woke up in the morning I wondered just for an instant if Bindweed herself was part of the dream. But when I peered under the bed, she was lying there in my slipper, her cap awry and her thumb in her mouth. She might be 180, but she looked like a little fairy baby when she was fast asleep. Robin was wide awake. I could hear him skipping around the flat, singing, We're going to see Peter Pan today, hippy, hippy, hip, hooray! You sound happy, I said, going into the bathroom. Yes, I am, because we're going to see Peter Pan today, hippy, hippy, hip, hip, hooray! Did you hear it, Mabe? Robin called through the door. It's my song, and I made it all up by myself. I heard it, and it's very clever, I said. Did you hear all the words? They rhyme. We're going to see Peter Pan today. Hippy, hippy, hip, hip, hooray! Did you get it? Shall I sing it again? Robin persisted. He sang it again, whether I wanted to hear it or not. He sang it again and again until he nearly drove Mum and me mad, but it was sweet that he was so excited. Mum agreed that we could go straight after breakfast, once we were washed and dressed. Are you going to wear your fairy frock, Mabe? Robin asked. Mum looked up eagerly. You can if you really want to, she said. I so didn't want to. I sought wildly for an excuse. It might get all dirty and muddy in the gardens, I said. You're not going to roll in the grass, are you? Said Mum, giving me a sideways look. Of course not, but it's not very warm today, and I think I need to wear a cardie, which would look silly with my fairy dress. Besides, the wings might get crumpled, I said. I wore my check dress with a handy pocket and my blue cardigan on top. Bindweed was safely hidden, but able to peep out occasionally whenever she fancied. Robin continued to sing his Peter Pan song at the top of his voice, though Mum tried her best to stop him, especially when we walked past the parade of shops with her supermarket at the end. People's heads kept turning, and a tall, good-looking man standing at the entrance of Mum's supermarket smiled at him. Hey, young man, what a splendid song, he said. Hello, Mr. Henry, said Mum, all of a flutter. Mr. Henry? He wasn't remotely like a squat little vacuum cleaner. Robin, stop that singing at once, said Mum, giving his arm a little shake. Say hello to Mr. Henry, my boss, and this is my daughter, Mabe. Hello, said Robin cheerfully, not at all subdued. Hello, I mumbled, utterly confused. So, I guess you're going to see Peter Pan, said Mr. Henry. I thought that was a Christmas show. It's just the Peter Pan statue in Kensington Gardens, Mum said, blushing. Oh, that's a great idea, said Mr. Henry. My mum used to take us kids there when we were little. There's this round pond where posh little kids sail their boats. I tried to sail a huge chunk of wood instead, and it torpedoed one of the biggest boats and sank it, and Mum didn't half give me what for. What's a what for? Robin asked. A cuff about the head, said Mr. Henry, grinning, and I probably deserved it. My mum would never give me a cuff, said Robin, shocked. Of course she wouldn't. She's obviously a lovely mum, said Mr. Henry. Mum was rosy pink by now. Well, we'd better get going then, she said. She nodded shyly. Nice to see you, Mr. Henry. Nice to see you too, Mrs. Macclesfield, he said solemnly, but it sounded as if he was teasing her. Who's that man, Mum? Robin asked as we walked on. Shh, he's my boss, said Mum. But I thought he was all mean and strict. That man was funny and smiley, said Robin, without remotely lowering his voice. Will you shush? Mum hissed. I did think he was a bit strict at first, but he was only getting things sorted out. He's very kind. Robin lost interest and started singing his Peter Pan song again and again. You don't think he thought I was walking past on purpose, do you? Mum asked me, suddenly looking appalled. Of course not. You have to go past the shop to get to the bus stop, I said. I know, but perhaps he doesn't know. I wish we'd gone around the long way now, said Mum. She sighed. What did you think of him anyway? I don't know. He's okay, I said. I peered at her. What are you getting in such a state about, Mum? Well, I need to stay on his good side, said Mum, and I feel bad. The shop looked crowded already. He might wonder what I was doing, swanning off to Kensington Gardens instead of working. But you've never worked at the weekends, Mum. That's our time, I said. Yes, but I've never been given a raise before, said Mum. Oh, Mum, I wish you'd stop worrying about everything, I said. Bindweed craned upwards in my pocket until I could see the tiny stalk of her green cap. Perhaps she thought it was a real wish. It would be a waste. I didn't think all the fairies in the world could stop Mum worrying. I tried to remember what she'd been like when Dad was with us, and we were a proper family. She'd seemed just as anxious then, probably because Dad stayed out a lot playing his music and seemed in a dream half the time when he was at home. He didn't shout and he didn't sulk. He simply drifted about as if he wasn't really there. Or he sat and watched old movies. He especially loved the old Jurassic Park films. I hated thinking about the things that happened next, after Dad went out one evening to play a gig and didn't come back. Ever. So, I joined in Robin's Peter Pan song to distract myself. Luckily, we were the only people waiting at the bus stop, but when we got on the bus, Mum begged us both to stop. Let's sit at the top of the bus and pretend we're driving it, I suggested to Robin. I was too old to play at bus drivers, but I knew it would be a good way to stop him singing. Mum smiled at me gratefully. You'll be such a good mum one day, Mabe, she said. I wasn't sure I ever wanted to be a mum, or have a partner. I wanted to live in a little attic room all by myself and paint all day, maybe with a cat for company. It might be a little bit lonely, sometimes, but it would be peaceful. Bindweed was starting to fidget now, tickling my tummy as she moved about restlessly. I bent down, pretending to adjust the laces on my shoe. What's the matter? I whispered. This monstrous vehicle is jerking us around in a most unpleasant way. I'm starting to feel sick. Oh, please don't be sick in my pocket, I whispered. Thank you for being so sympathetic, Bindweed snapped sarcastically. Oh, my stomach, my ears. Your ears, I said. How could her ears feel sick? The noise, Bindweed explained. The terrible roaring noise. I presume she meant the sound of the bus, but there was nothing I could do to make it softer. I straightened up because I was starting to feel sick myself in that position. Robin was staring at me. What's the matter with my ears, he said. Nothing. I mean, I like your ears, I said. They look very, neat. They did actually look quite neat, and quite sweet, showing small and pink under the mop of curls. Robin rubbed his ears self-consciously. You are weird sometimes, he said, but raised his hands to hold an imaginary steering wheel. Brum, brum, out of my way, silly old cars, or I'll bump my bus right into you. It didn't look as if Robin was going to be a very considerate driver when he grew up. While he was terrorising traffic, I slipped my hand in my pocket and tried to stroke Bindweed, but she pushed me away, groaning softly. I had a sudden idea. Mum, I feel a bit sick, I said, and I lolled my head pathetically. Oh dear, said Mum, have a peppermint. That might make you feel a bit better. She poked around in her handbag for a little box of mints and gave me one. She gave one to Robin too, because he never wanted to be left out. I pretended to put it in my mouth, but deftly slipped it into my pocket instead. It'll make you feel better, I said softly. Sorry it's so big. Robin blinked. His neat ears were also very sharp. It's not big. They're about the smallest sweets ever. One crunch and they're gone. It would be like sticking an entire loaf of peppermint into a fairy mouth, but I hoped Bindweed would have the sense to take little licks. She was obviously finding it helpful, because she stopped flopping about and moaning after a little while. I concentrated on the view from the windows, staring at all the big brick buildings. If they seemed huge to me, even sitting at the top of the bus, then they'd be terrifyingly tall to Bindweed. I strained my eyes, but couldn't see any greenery apart from the odd hanging basket or window ledge, and I could see that those wouldn't be very satisfactory fairy homes. But at last I saw a gleam of green, and then a whole wide expanse, as far as I could see. We're here, said Mum, pressing the bell for the bus to stop. Hold my hand, Robin. We have to get off now. We're at Kensington Gardens. They weren't like any garden I'd ever seen. They were absolutely vast, with long stretches of grass and sandy paths as far as the eye could see. I felt stirring inside my pocket. Bindweed was peeping out too, though her hands were over her ears because of the roar of the traffic going past. It's very noisy, but I think it will get much quieter when we're right inside the gardens, I announced, so she could hear. Where's Peter Pan then? Said Robin, peering around. I'm not quite sure, Chickie. We'll just have a wander. I'm sure we'll find him, said Mum. We had a very long wander, We came across the round pond that Mr. Henry had mentioned. There were children playing with boats, exactly as he'd said, and even some grown-ups with fancy motorised miniature yachts. There were quite a few women with babies in buggies. Mum whispered that they were probably nannies. I stared at them with interest, but none of them looked like Mary Poppins. Robin was disappointed too. I wish one was a nanny dog like Nana in Peter Pan, he said. Robin pretended to be a dog himself, gambolling about, sniffing the grass and then running all the way around the pond until he had to throw himself on the grass, breathless. Mum took out a bottle of water from her handbag and gave me a drink, and gave him a drink too. I had some. I'd have liked to offer Bindweed a thimbleful, but it was too public and someone might see. I peered all around looking for a quiet, secluded spot behind a hedge, but it was all so open, everything trimmed so neatly, and there were people everywhere. Maybe Kensington Gardens was the wrong place for her to live after all. I couldn't see any bindweed flowers anywhere. I hoped Peter Pan might be in a better place. It took us a long time to find him, right the other side of the gardens. "Is that Peter Pan?" Robin cried. It was a terrible disappointment. He was a dark grey statue with a pudding basin haircut, and he seemed to be wearing a frock. "Why is he wearing a dress?" Robin asked. "It's not a dress. It's a kind of tunic," said Mum. "Well, it looks silly," said Robin. It did, rather, and Peter Pan himself looked silly too, holding a little horn to his lips and pointing his feet. He had a strange grey girl peering up at him, and odd little features all around his plinth, but none looked like proper fairies. There were real children trying to climb up on him too, though they kept being scolded for it. It was noisier than the infants' playground at dinner time. I could feel Bindweed sinking to the bottom of my pocket in despair. I'd promised to find her a home, and I'd failed miserably. And that is where we will leave part 5 of Project Fairy by Jacqueline Wilson. I'll be back soon with the next part of this fantastic story, and lots more stories and videos coming your way very soon. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.